I was kind of thinking this week about what it looks like when the church runs into battle. And I found this clip on YouTube as I was just kind of watching stuff, and I thought, man, sometimes that's what it feels like being a church running into battle. So, I mean, that's about it, right? Sometimes it feels like that. We're just kind of gung-ho, yeah, and it's like, what are we doing? What are you? And yeah, so why do entrances matter? I mean, they do. Entrances matter because it gives us a chance to set a good first impression, right? It gives us a chance at a new beginning. It sets the tone for what we're going to do. And sometimes our entrances just flop. They don't end up the way that we would like them to go. Well, they don't go the way we'd like them to go. Today, we're going to see Moses make an entrance. Okay? He's going to enter the stadium, if you will. He's going to enter this combat, in a way, a battle with Pharaoh. But the interesting thing is it's not actually going to be Moses fighting at all. He makes the entrance, but it's actually the Lord that's doing all the fighting. If you're following along with your YouVersion Bible app this morning, today's message is called Arriving at the Stadium. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 5, beginning in verse 1, and we're going to go all the way through that chapter and into chapter 6, 13 verses into chapter 6. So that's a lot of reading we're going to do, so we need to kind of be hustling along here. So let's jump right into it. Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." Then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." There's a lot of stuff that kind of strikes me in that passage there. What strikes you first? So what's like the first thing you think when you hear that? I know when I read that, the first thing I notice is how much bravery it would have taken Aaron and Moses to actually make this presentation to Pharaoh. I challenge you, go into your boss's office on Monday morning and say, "Hey, the first hour of work every day, I'm going to start off with a Bible study with whoever I want to invite, and you're going to pay me for it." How well is that going to go? Probably not too well. I would be afraid to do that at my job. No, I would not. No, you probably wouldn't do that at your office job or whatever job you're doing, right? Because it's a challenge to walk in and to make demands of someone that has power over you, right? It can be a scary thing. Now, it would be hard to do that even if God told you directly that morning, "You're going to go into the office and you are going to demand something of your boss for me." That would be really uncomfortable, right? To make demands of your own boss like that. So imagine Moses, he's standing in front of arguably the most powerful man in the world at the time to tell him, or really at this point ask him, to let his people go and worship their God in the wilderness. Now, we think of political people today as public servants, but back then, the public was their servant. Okay, the Pharaoh was there believing that he was a god. As a matter of fact, there's a guy named Plutarch, and he was a first century writer, and that's a little statue of his face there. And he was writing in the first century, and he mentioned that there was a statue called the Veil of Isis, which was an Egyptian statue. And basically there was an inscription on the temple for this that said, "I am that which was and is and shall be, and no man has lifted my veil." That's what they believed about their Egyptian gods or goddesses. And so they actually believed Pharaoh was also a god, so that's what they would have believed about Pharaoh, that he was eternal, who was and is and shall be, and no one had the ability to question them. But the reality is Moses is standing here before Pharaoh. Remember, he grew up with Pharaoh. And so he knew very clearly that this was just a man. This was not the God, because he had actually met the real God, the only God, the God of the Hebrews. And so he had to do something that was uncomfortable. He had to do something that was uncertain. He had to do something that was dangerous. And he had to do something that was terrifying. He had to confront Pharaoh and make demands of him. Sometimes for us, we have to make similar stands. We might have to take a stand at work, or maybe against the government, or against our friends, or against our family. The reality is that we have to accept this. If you're filling in your blanks this morning, this is the first one. Obeying God requires bravery. Obeying God requires bravery. In Moses' case, he was demanding freedom. Why? Why was he standing before Pharaoh demanding freedom for the Hebrews? Well, simply because the Hebrews didn't belong to Egypt. They belonged to God. See, God had already made a covenant and a promise to the Hebrew people, and they were his. And so God was taking them back. And Pharaoh responds with, who's the Lord? I don't know the Lord. And really, if Pharaoh does one thing right through this whole story, this is it. Saying, who is the Lord? Because the truth is, this battle scene, if you will, from here through the rest of our study, it's not about Moses, it's not about Aaron, and it's not about Pharaoh. It's about God. And so Pharaoh is asking the right question, who is God? Who is the Lord? So Moses doesn't start here, though, at freedom. Notice that when Moses walks in and makes his first demand, he comes in pretty soft. He says, hey, just let us go worship God in the wilderness. We'll be right back. But that's not ultimately what God wanted, okay? This is just an opportunity to worship God is his starting point, and that's going to build up as this thing goes along. Let's go ahead and jump into verse 4. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. The same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made in the past you shall impose on them. You shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to let you go out into the wilderness. As a matter of fact, you seem to have too much time on your hands. Coming in here making ridiculous requests of me. If you got time to make crazy requests, maybe you have more time to do some work. Your population keeps growing, so you have time for other things as well. You need to get back to work. He says, I think you're just lazy. So if we keep you occupied with making bricks, we don't have to worry about you making these crazy requests to go worship your Hebrew God, whoever that is. And now, so he says basically, not only are you going to keep making bricks for me, but now you're going to do it with no straw. And you got to keep making the same amount. Sounds pretty unfair, right? Keep doing what you were doing before, but now you got to get your own straw. Good luck with that. All right, here's the thing. Here's your second fill in the blank this morning. God never says that freedom is easy. God never says that freedom is easy. And freedom comes in all shapes and sizes and forms, right? When we're seeking God, the primary thing we're seeking is spiritual freedom, right? Dropping the shackles and chains from our sin. But God never promises that that process is going to be easy. And too often we serve God, and when we don't gain anything from it that we want or we desire from the get-go, we quit. I remember when I was in California, we had this, we did a lot of homeless breakfasts, but we did a really big one at Easter time. And in between services, we had this big breakfast out front with pancakes and eggs and all kind of stuff. And one of the guys that had volunteered to serve was serving up and everything. And one of the homeless people came through the line and they said something like, oh man, these eggs are slimy. That's disgusting. I don't want any of those. Well, the guy threw his spoon down and walked away. He's like, I'm not serving these people. They're ungrateful. We're here giving them free eggs. They should take whatever we give them. I'm not going to serve them then. See, oftentimes we only want to do what God says when it's convenient, or we feel good, or we like the person. But that's not what God tells us to do, is it? He doesn't say to only do it when we want to. He says that we are called to do his will regardless of the cost. You know, E.N.A. Gardner said this, to be comforted by God is a promise that few of us ever receive because we are consumed with controlling our situations to avoid being vulnerable. We're obsessed with having everything be on our own terms, the way that we want it to be. That's what we desire as human beings. Like, if we're going to do this for God, it's going to be on my terms. And that's the way that we try to live. And oftentimes we deal with challenging things in our lives, right? Addictions, mourning, illnesses, failures. And what we do is we end up keeping them secret because we don't want people to know that we're struggling. And the truth is that starts to weigh on us and it piles up on us and we start to get angry with God. Like, why don't you do something about this, God? But the truth is God wants to comfort us. He wants to actually use his people to comfort us. So when we keep these secrets, it's actually us that's keeping God from helping us. And yet we get mad at him for not doing it on our terms. because we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be honest because we're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of honesty. And so we take whatever last bit of strength we have to cover it all up and put on a smile and walk into church on Sunday morning. And then when it's like, yeah, I can't talk to people around here, Pastor Dan, though. I've been mistreated. I don't trust people. They won't get it. Well, number one, you've probably never actually given them a chance. And if you have and they're still doing that, then number two, you're probably hanging out with the wrong people. Because I know there are people that are good in this congregation that want to help you, that want to come alongside you and won't treat you that way. And so if you're not finding those people, then you might be looking in the wrong places. Now, we're going to see that this actually gets worse before it gets better for the Hebrews and for Moses. Let's go to verse 10. So the taskmasters and the foremen of the people went out and said to the people, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go and get your straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced in the least." So the people were scattered throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters were urgent, saying, "Complete your work, your daily task each day, as when there was straw." And the foremen of the people of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not done all your task of making bricks today and yesterday as in the past?" So Pharaoh is increasing the workload, right? Expecting the same results, and this isn't fair. But sometimes the reality is life isn't fair. People do that. It happens to us. Have you ever been treated unfairly? Had unfair expectations? When I was working as a youth pastor, I had some very unfair expectations put on me. The guy that I was taking over for was giving 110% in youth ministry. And I know that because he did his job, and then people were saying, yeah, but he neglected his family a lot. So it was like, okay, so he's doing 110%, more than he should be doing at his job there. And when I came in, they said, hey, we want you to be 70% youth and 30% worship. And so people were upset that I wasn't doing the same amount of work as him, and I sat down with the leaders and with the pastor, and I said, hey, what 30 to 40% am I not supposed to be doing? And the response was, I don't know, figure it out. The only option for me was disappoint everyone. That doesn't seem fair, does it? Well, sometimes we get unfair burdens placed upon us. That's what is going to happen to us in life, but there's more to it than that. You can't just, every time that happens, you can't just walk away and go, well, this is unfair, I'm not going to serve God then. Because then we'll just have a whole bunch of people that never serve God, right? Sometimes expectations are unfair. Sometimes honoring God actually requires being treated unfairly. And some of us want to say, well, God, if that's how you're going to treat me, see ya. You know, John Powell said, by afflictions, God is spoiling us of what otherwise might have spoiled us. When he makes the world too hot to hold, we let it go. Sometimes we need that little push, that little challenge to make us say, ugh, whatever's placing the requirements on me in this world, maybe that's not something I want to cling to. Maybe that's not where I want to find my validation. And so the Hebrews are going to learn a very valuable lesson in this. Let's go to verse 15. Then the foreman of the people of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, "Why do you treat your servants like this? No straw is given to your servants, yet they say to us, 'Make bricks.' And behold, your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people." But he said, "You are idle. You are idle. That is why you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Go now and work. No straw will be given to you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks." The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when they said, "You shall by no means reduce the number of your bricks, your daily task each day." Now, an archaeological study of bricks in Egypt shows something very interesting. Straw was a very important ingredient in brick making in ancient Egypt. Because what they would do is they would get the straw, they would chop it up, they'd mix it with the clay, and then they would form their bricks. Now, the straw that was in the bricks would actually help the clay to hold its shape while it was drying in the sun. And then the straw would start to decay and it would release humic acid, which would make the clay dry harder and stronger. So here's the thing, when you need to make a brick and there is no straw, what do? Well, you might try making bricks without straw. That might be something you could do, right? But see, the problem is then your bricks don't hold up when they're drying. They start to slowly flatten out, or they'll crumble because they don't have the humic acid. And really if you're making bricks that are unusable, then you're not really being productive. And so that slows you down. Or you may start to say, well, then we're going to go get our own straw, which is what they tried to do. And so the interesting challenge there, though, is if you think about the situation, right? The way that it used to be is they would make the bricks, but they would have the straw delivered because Egypt had a straw industry, if you will, right? They'd bring these carts of straw that was chopped and ready to go. But now the Hebrews have to get their own. These slaves don't own that industry. They don't have the ability to go get the straw the way that the Egyptians would have been able to do. So they had to go scavenge for it. They had to go find whatever they could use. And so it's interesting because if you look at these old bricks in Egypt, even today, you can see some bricks that were made with chopped straw. You can see some bricks that are made with straw that's just been pulled out of the ground. It still has roots and clumps and stuff in it. And then you can find some bricks that have no straw in them whatsoever. Evidence that what this is saying happened, and maybe it happened more often than just with the Hebrews. And so basically, this is an impossible situation, and the Hebrews are going to have to figure out how to deal with this. There's a very, very powerful lesson here, and simply I can, give it to you all right now in one single verse. Matthew 19:26, it says this, "But Jesus looked at them and said, 'With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible.'" That's what the Hebrews are going to have to learn. They're pretty unfamiliar with their God at this point, probably. And so they're actually going to get to see with their own eyes the power of the God that they have actually already made a covenant with through Abraham. Here's your third fill in the blank this morning. There is no impossible with God. There is no impossible with God. They're not going to figure this out right away, but as the story goes, they're going to start to see this more and more and more, but it's still going to be challenging for them to accept it. Kind of like our walk with God. Right? We see God work in our lives, but there are still moments where we struggle with it. Smith Wigglesworth said, "There is nothing impossible with God. All the impossibility is with us when we measure God by the limitation of our unbelief." If you believe something is impossible, it's not God that's the problem. It's us. So let's see how the Hebrews respond to what Moses has been trying to set up with Pharaoh. Okay, let's go to verse 20. "They met Moses and Aaron, who were waiting for them as they came out from Pharaoh. And they said to them, 'The Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us.'" How many times in my life can I think of where I have tried to do something right for God, and the person I'm trying to help ends up mad at me? It happens to me all the time. I had a guy living in my house for free who ended up threatening to kill me. I tried to help an alcoholic face his addiction, and he cussed me out for being a fake Christian. "You call yourself a pastor?" I tried to counsel a guy who was facing really hard times, and he told me that I'm the reason he doesn't believe in God anymore. We let somebody use our pool one time, and we ended up with a bag of poop on our front porch. True story. Sometimes, as a Christian, when you're trying to serve other people, you don't get back what you're hoping to get back. So that's what they're doing with Moses right now. Moses is trying to get them free to go worship their God, and they're upset with him. So let's see how they respond to Moses here in verse 22. "Then Moses turned to the Lord and said, 'O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all.'" So Moses turns around and gets mad at God. In those moments, it's easy to forget who we are and who God is when we're frustrated with things. We start to say, "I'm righteous, God. Shouldn't that mean that everything is sunshine and roses for me? I'm trying to do things for you." Let me ask you this. Who is the most holy and righteous man ever to live? Think about it. Who is the most holy and righteous man ever to live? Jesus. Sunday school answer, right? Everybody knows the answer is Jesus. Where did his righteousness lead him? To his death on a cross. So why is it that we think we deserve better? What did Jesus say in John 15:18? "If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you." See, we're going to get rewarded in heaven, but here on this earth, it might get a little tough first. And so Moses is asking a question here of God, right? Is that wrong? Is it wrong for Moses to say, "What are you doing, God?" Well, let's see how this plays out. We're going to flip over to chapter 6 now, and let's finish this up here. Let's go to verse 1, chapter 6. This section here is more for Moses, what God is saying. Verse 1, "But the Lord said to Moses, 'Now you shall see what I do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they have lived as sojourners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Okay, there's three really important lessons to learn here. Moses is saying, God, why did you send me? And then he says, you've done nothing. That's what Moses is saying to God. Right? You sent me here to do this, now they're mad, you've done nothing to help them out. Well, what do we do with that? Well, I mean, God responds with, don't worry about it, I've heard the problem and I know my promises. So what do we learn? Well, number 4 is this. Questioning God is okay. Accusing him is not. And always trust his answers. You know, David Guzik said, Moses was too impressed by Pharaoh and not impressed enough by God. See, God makes us plenty of promises in Scripture, and the truth is many of them have already been fulfilled, or they happened, have not yet been fulfilled, or they happened too long ago for us to prove them. So a lot of the promises, it's hard for us to kind of, absorb them because we've never seen them because they're old or because they haven't happened yet. However, we still have to continue trusting God regardless of just what we see around us. What was it exactly that they needed to trust? What was it that the Hebrews needed to trust about God? Well, God made promises to Abraham. He said that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. He said that they would become a mighty nation, and he said that they would dwell in the land of Canaan. Those are the promises that God made. But there's also one more promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So let's flip there real quick. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 2. And there's something there we're going to see that's going to go, oh yeah, I can see where this is going. God promised, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that they will be a blessing, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. He says, whoever dishonors you, I will curse. That should be a clue to us that Egypt is probably in trouble with God. Right? God made a promise that anyone who dishonors the nation of Israel will be cursed. And now we see Egypt going, I don't know God, I don't know you, get back to work. Do more work with less. So then God tells Moses what to say to the people. So this chunk here in verse 6 is more for the Hebrews. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. There's a certain phrase that gets repeated in that chunk over and over and over again. Do you notice that? It's I will. I will. He makes a set of promises. He doesn't start with, if you do this, I'll do this. No, he just says, I will, I will, I will. And what's interesting is a lot of those I will promises he makes to the Israelites, he also makes to us through Christ. Think about it. What does he say there that he also promises us in Christ? He says, I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. All things that he does for all of us through Christ. You know, Josh McDowell said, knowing that God is faithful, it really helps me to not be captivated by worry. But knowing that he will do what he has said, he will cause it to happen, whatever he has promised, and then it causes me to be less involved in worrying about a situation. See, it all comes down to trusting God, church. When we see things that are impossible in front of us, we go, well, I don't see the answer, but I trust that God does. And that's our responsibility as a follower. And thank God he's given us the promises that he has. But the truth is we don't always do a good job of remembering or trusting those promises. So let's see what the Hebrews do here in verse 9. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. So the Lord said to Moses, "Go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of this land." But Moses said to the Lord, "Behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips." But the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. God's not playing games anymore. Like, okay, you went in there, you asked to go worship in the wilderness. He said no. Now I'm telling you, I don't care if they're not listening to you. I don't care if he doesn't like it. Go in there and tell them to let my people go, period. And so we're going to stop right there today, and we see that Pharaoh doesn't want to listen, the Hebrews don't want to listen, Moses doesn't want to listen. So what can we learn about human beings from that? We don't like to listen. We don't like to listen, but there's a takeaway though. We may not like to listen, but does it actually matter? Because whether we listen or not, God is still God. I want to jump over to the life of Paul really quickly. Remember, Paul was a Pharisee, okay? Like as Jewish as you could get, right? He was a Christian persecutor, and he was on his way on the road to Damascus to go persecute some more. Okay, that's what Paul was doing. Not the kind of guy you would think would be a great candidate to ever be a Christian, right? A murderer of Christians. And suddenly the Lord steps in and blinds Paul, and Paul says this. And I said, this is in Acts 26:15. And I said, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand upon your feet. For I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you." He stood there, he interrupted Paul in the midst of trying to go get more Christians and round them up to have them killed or imprisoned. And Jesus said, "Stand up. You are going to work for me." And you might think, if this was any other situation, no one would look at this and go, "Oh yeah, Paul's the right guy for this job." That wouldn't happen. And yet, Paul goes on to write 13 letters in the New Testament. He trained pastors. He witnessed to kings, to foreign peoples, to religious rulers. He went to prison and was probably eventually martyred. He probably started 20 different churches. He went from a Christian killer, essentially, to that. That's who God chose to use. So do you think that God can use this stiff-necked Hebrew people? I think he can. He'll use them, and he still uses them today. So what do we need to know about this? Here's your last point this morning, church. Number 5, God will never fail. God will never fail. Ever. You may not like his goals, you may not like his plans, but he will never miss his target. I want to close out with this illustration here. I have this picture of an airplane this was a chart that they made in World War II. Every time an airplane would come back, they would document where the bullet holes were in the airplane. And so they'd make a little mark. And that was the chart that they came up with. And they were trying to figure out what to do with that information. And so they said, well, if that's where all the bullets are going, we should reinforce those areas. Makes sense, right? There's a hole there, you might want to have that patched up. But then there was a Hungarian mathematician named Abraham Wald that looked at that and said, no, that's not the right thing to do. Because we have something called survivorship bias. Anybody ever heard of survivorship bias? A couple of us? Basically, we look at the things that survive when we should be looking at the things that don't survive. Because the truth is, all those bullet holes were on planes that made it home. They didn't need extra armor over those holes. They needed armor over the places where there were no bullet holes, because every plane that had a bullet hole in one of those places went down. So if you want to armor something, you armor the places that did not have holes in them. What they needed to do was rethink their perspective. See, in our culture, we're taught things, and we start to believe that we're entitled to things like comfort. We believe we're entitled to ease. We believe we're entitled to luxury. We believe we're entitled to fairness. It's like, I shouldn't have a headache. Give me Tylenol. I shouldn't be cold. Turn up the heater. I shouldn't be poor. Give me more money. Right? When there's something we don't like, we believe we're entitled to the result because we shouldn't have to go through something difficult or challenging. Now, if we have access to those remedies, great. But sometimes our suffering actually has a point to it. See, when things get hard, we're supposed to look at God. And sometimes we do look at God and we say, you know what, God, if you don't give me what I want, I'm not going to worship you. If you don't take this struggle away, then I hate you. Things are hard and I am just so angry at you, God. But here's the truth. God uses trials and struggles for our good. And so instead of being angry, we should ask, God, in this trial, how can you be glorified? God, in this struggle, what do you want to accomplish? God, in this pain, how am I supposed to grow? See, that's the thing, is that suffering can be a good thing. Imagine for a second that in this suffering that the Hebrews are facing, what would have happened if God would have said, oh, okay, never mind. They'd have just still been enslaved in Egypt, right? And actually, that Hungarian-born mathematician that figured out the airplane holes, he never would have been around because he was a Jew. So God used that struggling not just to make a decision about airplanes, but think about all the things that the nation of Israel was used for. Right? Think about the idea that we got the kingly line, the priestly line, the nationhood, the place where the Messiah would eventually come from. All that came from the nation of Israel that was never going to exist if they did not go through this struggle to come out of the land of Egypt and realize that they serve a God that is powerful enough to do the impossible. That's what it's all about, church. And that's what we need to take home this morning, that we serve a God that is capable of doing the impossible. And my prayer is that we will remember that this week and forever on as we follow him, to remember that even if things look hard, he still has the ability to take care of us.